Everything is outlawed. This story contains disturbing content. Viewer discretion is advised. The day drawled on. It was freezing cold. I shivered and tightened my jacket around me. Patches had been sewn over the holes from wear and tear. Again and again. New clothing was a luxury for the elite. Second-hand was for the middle class. And everyone else kept reusing whatever they had. Who thought in 10 years everything would have changed? In an attempt to stop or slow down global warming, a new chemical was dispersed into the atmosphere. For the last 5 years, there has been little sunlight. Many of the farms and ecosystems had begun to collapse, and that caused massive food shortages. The weather was colder, and soon many industries began to shut down. The resource wars had been in progress for many years, and so the world changed. Wars over water, farming land, and dwindling resources. First, it was oil, and extended to others. Most people were unaware of it happening until it finally reached their doorstep. I rubbed under my eyes with my sleeve. So far, I've been waiting over an hour for the food line to move forward. In every city across the country, there were food shortages and government-sanctioned rationing. I never thought there would be a black market for baked beans. I heard a truck drive past and saw several large trucks, guarded by armed soldiers. The food trucks were reserved for the government and probably their families. I could hear people around me grumbling, glaring at the trucks, but no one dared to do anything about it. Society had become increasingly unstable. The line slowly crept forward, and each time, I'm worried the infamous close sign would appear, and we would be forced to leave empty-handed. So far, so good. There were only 3 people ahead of me, and I could see the bags of food. My stomach grumbled at the sight. I got to the start of the queue, and an exhausted-looking woman greeted me with a tired smile of recognition. "Hello, could I see your ID and your allotment card?" she asked, the dark circles under her eyes. Hollow cheeks and marked skin revealed she had survived one of the many illnesses going around at the time. I took my well-worn ID and my allotment card out, handed it to her, and she looked it over. I worried there'd be some new policy that would deny me food, but these fears were for nothing when she handed it back to me, lifted the bag and said, "Good luck. This is your last bag for the next month." I took the bag and didn't bother to look at it. You got what you were given and you were grateful for it. I lifted it up and held it close to my chest as I walked home. There was no way I was going to let someone take this from me. I walked home and wished I asked some people to come with me. I remembered when I used to have to worry about someone trying to steal my money, which was now worthless, and any valuable items I had left. Now, all people wanted was to take your food, water, or any information that could help you get either. I hurried home. I could feel eyes on me, and fortunately no one approached me. They were all too busy trying to get out of the stinging rain. I pulled my jacket hood over my head to protect my face. I could feel the burning sensation on my hands, and I couldn't do anything about that. My younger brother greeted me at the door. He was taller than me now, and was probably hungry. We were all always hungry. He looked in the bag, and we entered the small apartment we had been allocated after our house in the suburbs had been claimed for the hard-working troops and their families. I've always supported the armed forces and the sacrifices they made for our country, but how our government went about all of this was so incredibly dirty. My parents sat at the tiny kitchen table with a newspaper between them. Like everyone else, they would have been looking at the employment section, desperate for some kind of work that would help us. They didn't even look up at me. My brother put the bag on the kitchen table and started taking the canned goods out. I haven't seen fresh fruit or vegetables for years. The apartment was run down when we got here. There were cracks in the walls revealing the brickwork. One of the cupboards had its door taken off. The tiles were damaged and it was overall in poor repair. We tried to make it a home. We covered the damaged parts, put up little paintings, and it was still a far cry from the home we used to have before. Electricity was rare now. For people like myself, it only came on during set time periods during the day. And once that was done, that was it. No more. At night time we would freeze. And during one particularly bad night, there were reports of people dying of the cold in their homes. This nearly caused a riot that was only silenced by armed police, threats to deny us electricity and food, and most people complied to go back to their homes. That was when the pamphlets started. Families with elderly or sick family members were encouraged with the promise of higher food tokens to deliver them so that they could pass peacefully. Their sacrifice was for the good of the country and brighter days to come. At first, people refused, but as there were shortages of food and medicine, many elderly family members wanted to be taken to the drop-off points. The soldiers never answered what would happen to them. Years ago, I watched my grandpa get on the truck with the other people. He smiled at me, told me to be good, and I've never seen my parents so broken. My father changed after that. My family didn't watch while the truck drove away. I couldn't help but keep looking back as he was driven, and I hoped they were taken somewhere nice before they passed, even though I knew it was unlikely. I went out to sit on the balcony. Fortunately, it was covered so the rain wouldn't burn my skin, and looked out at the city. There were flames where people tried to light the place up, and to try to keep warm. Anything and everything was burnt. The stink of chemicals filled my nostrils, and I tried to block it out. I closed my eyes and imagined being on a small, grassy hill with the sun on my face, and it was easy to breathe. Things could always be worse. I could have been taken to one of the camps or be on the streets. People always disappear from both of those places. I heard people fighting, yelling, babies and children crying, and the infamous security trucks driving through with the announcements. When I first heard them, it was blaring, but it had become normal. My mum called me in for dinner, and I went in for a tiny portion of food. I ate slowly and imagined more on my plate. My mum barely ate hers, and kept trying to give us some more of hers. No one accepted it, no matter how hungry we were. I went to sleep, shivering and wrapped in many blankets. We could never tell what tomorrow would bring. I woke up to a loud knocking at the front door. My dad walked over to it with a baseball bat and cautiously opened it. He saw a family, 2 dads and their children standing there. All they had were the clothes on their backs. One of them apologized to my dad and handed him a piece of paper. I could hear more commotion in the hallways, with there being a lot more people there now. This family was also allocated to live here in the apartment too. None of us were happy about this, yet it wasn't their fault. We welcomed them in and tried to make space for them. Later that night, the fighting was worse than it had been in months. We were already living in cramped conditions, only made worse by strangers moving in. Why the government had decided to displace even more people is unknown. There are rumors that the northern states are slowly being depopulated. I could hear the chatter from inside the apartment when my parents were talking to the 2 dads. I sat outside and wondered what we were going to do food-wise. How could we eat when they weren't able to? Later, I'd go out and try to come up with a way of getting more food. But I heard something that caused me to listen silently. One of the 2 dads told mine of a resistance movement. It was growing fast, and that we would all someday get our liberties back. My dad seemed intrigued by the motion, but my dad warned him that he has a family. If one person was convicted of a crime, the entire family was impacted by it too. I was naturally interested in this resistance movement. Who wouldn't be? A chance for our society to return to the prosperous one. I listened, and when I got a chance to speak with one of the dads, I took my chance. I asked him more about it, and he looked around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. He told me they would be meeting down under the docks this evening, if I wanted to go with him. I debated this. Human trafficking and crime had become such a normal part of our lives. The risk hung over us like an ominous shadow. But going to the docks with a stranger I barely knew seemed foolish. Not nearly as bad as having a strange family move in against our will. Later that night, I said nothing and watched while he crept out of the apartment, down the fire escape stairs. I put the hood over my head and followed him at a distance. I followed the grey man technique as I walked through the streets. I wanted to blend in, to be forgettable. The closer I got to the docks, I could smell the foul aroma of rotting fish and polluted water. I wrinkled my nose. Years ago, the smell would have made me sick, but much like everything else, you get used to it. There were a group of gathered people standing under the docks. Legally, we were still able to go out at night and meet up with other people. Yet, this, I doubt it would have been considered to be okay. I hid behind several burnt-out barrels that smelled absolutely foul and waited. The man who I guessed was the leader was of average height. A scruffy-looking man, who was flanked by two men who looked to be former military. He told us the founding fathers would never have stood for this, and we needed to take our country back. He laid down plans to ensure we would have enough food and housing, that kids would go back to school and get an education again, that we'd have medicine, that we would have fresh food again. The crowd was getting excited. He asked who wanted to join the cause, and several people raised their hands. There were flashing lights, and soon they were surrounded by the military, some in uniform and others without. The would-be rebels were put into trucks and their fates would be dark. Treason was punished severely. I hid and waited silently. I didn't want to end up on the trucks. However, that man's speech stayed with me. The lessons and teachings had left their mark. When I was sure they were all gone, I made my way home, taking the long way, and making sure no one followed me. I saw one of the dads on the couch crying. Word had already reached him about his partner. My parents were incredibly angry with me. My mum slapped me hard across the face for the first time, before she pulled me into a hard, unyielding hug while she wept. Her body rocked violently. I went to bed that night, hungry, and slept. I dreamed I was a rebel. I woke up and told my parents I would be in the markets trying to find some food, or other supplies we needed. Before everything went to shit, my parents were near enough helicopter parents, constantly looking out for me and keeping me safe. In this society, what was the point? My younger brother went to work with my father at the recycling plant. Hard work, little pay, and health issues. However, starvation was the greatest threat to us at the present. I have been asked to do some extremely disgusting things for items I used to take for granted. I watched other women accept, do the deed, and come back with the item in their hand, either numb or unable to look anyone in the eyes. Or sometimes, even worse, they'd come back empty-handed. I made my way through the streets and headed to the unofficial black market. Technically, no one had permits to sell anything, but the local government let it slide. There were people selling random items. One elderly man, no doubt a book lover in times past, had his book collection in front of him. Books were now for the elite only. His collection now would be used to start fires. Old technology, smartphones, laptops, desktops no longer had any value. Designer or fast fashion was obsolete, the latter being a blessing on the already strained planet. People needed sturdy clothing that would last. I wanted to see if I could find some food. People's pets had long since been eaten, and some tried to release them into the wild. When food became too scarce, meat was always questionable, whether it was a rat, someone's pet, or perhaps even a human being. It was easy to just not ask questions and be thankful for having a full stomach. I smelled something warm cooking and my stomach growled. I saw a man selling unknown pieces of meat on skewers. When I asked him how much, he asked him for the rest of my food tokens and for a little fun behind his wooden cart. I suggested perhaps something else would be better. And did he need help to cook? I could do that instead. He told me he made his offer, and if I wanted the food, I would do it. I looked at the food, then back at him, then back at the food again. Already the food was desperately low. We always needed more food. I turned and walked away. Hopefully there would be another vendor I could purchase from. There was another selling some canned goods, but they were dented or bloated. I'm pretty sure a couple of them were even from the 1950s. There was no way I was going to bring those home. I wish I had paid attention to any survival tips or methods for foraging edible food. A lady was selling decent-sized bags of rice. Now this would be excellent. I ran my fingers through it and found random bits of plastic or tiny stones in it. Soon I realized it was mainly little extras to try to bulk it up. I sighed and asked her how much it was. The same ridiculous price. I asked her if I could have any bags with just rice. She shook her head and told me this was all there was. I offered her the same deal that was declined, and she agreed. I helped her sell her wares. She let me keep a quarter of the credits earned, and then sneakily gave me a small bag of pure rice hidden under the cart, clearly reserved for her prime customers. I thanked her and hid it under my jacket to make my way home, when I saw the soldiers. They were checking each of the carts for any contraband, which could mean absolutely anything these days, and the rules constantly changed. I held the bag close to my chest, breathed and kept walking straight. If you ran or acted suspiciously, it would only draw more attention to you. I walked past and tried to look natural when I felt a hand around my upper arm. I turned and looked to see a soldier's gas mask face close to mine. The soldiers never showed their faces anymore. "Stop!" His voice boomed, hostile when it didn't need to be. "Yes, sir? What's wrong, sir?" I answered politely, lowered my head, and tried to look as non-threatening as possible. "Lift up your hands. What did you buy?" he demanded. "Just some rice, sir. It's under my jacket. May I?" He opened it and pulled it from my arms. The soldier opened the bag and saw the rice. He went still. He reached out, grabbed me by my arm, and threw me down hard against the concrete. I hit my jaw and tasted blood. He and who I am guessing was his commanding officer were talking among themselves. Their heads occasionally looked in my direction, and the officer nodded, deciding my fate. The soldier lifted me up by my arm and led me to one of the infamous weathered trucks. I whimpered and pulled away from him. I've seen them countless times and never thought I'd be put inside one. "No, please," I murmured before being thrown inside. There were a couple of people in there already. Did my face match their sad, broken ones? I knew my parents would find out eventually. I looked out the back as the truck rumbled to a start. We began the drive and I glanced through the gap to see where we were going. I hadn't left the area near my apartment for a long time and was disgusted by what I saw along the roads. There were rotting bodies hanging from stripped trees and long poles with signs saying, "Treason," "Deserters," and another word I couldn't make out. The roads were lined with garbage, rusted cars, and makeshift checkpoints between different areas. I wondered what my old street now looked like. One of the soldiers must have noticed me looking out and closed the blind, making the truck completely dark inside. I don't know how long the truck drove for. One of my fellow captives relieved himself where he sat, and the place stank. I wrinkled my nose, and I imagined I was somewhere else. Anywhere else. I was back at the poolside relaxing with the smell of barbecue and the sound of my family enjoying themselves. The truck drove along a rocky road. We all bounced around inside, and my body bruised before it finally came to a jolted halt. My daydream broken. The blind was pulled open. It was dark except for the insanely bright spotlights down on us. A voice over a loudspeaker told us to get down and put our hands on our heads. I didn't wait to be yanked down and got down, my hands on my head. One of the soldiers, I'm guessing, kicked my knees out from under me to force me to kneel. I didn't say anything. I could hear the barking of dogs on tight leashes. It felt like forever I was forced to kneel, until who I'm guessing was someone in power spoke. "For crimes against the NAG, you are all condemned to 50 years of hard labor. Your crimes may be reduced for compliance, newfound loyalty, and dedication to the new American government." The call came out. We were separated according to perceived gender. Soldiers with rifles watched us and took us into the medical facility, where a cold-looking doctor in a lab coat waited. We were forced to strip, and I noticed how sickly all of us were. We were gaunt. Our lack of vitamins caused old wounds to open back up again, and we were all covered in random sores. Finally, it was my turn to walk in front of everyone naked. I sat on the cold metal chair and waited while the doctor looked me over. I felt like a lab rat to be studied. The doctor asked me if I was pregnant. I said no. She asked me if I had ever been pregnant. Again, no. Then asked if I had regular periods. I said yes, so long as I was getting enough food. They scribbled down some notes. I didn't know if I just made my life easier, or if it had become much worse. I was given a folded coarse grey uniform, and I was sent to be cleaned up. Normally I would have loved to have a proper shower. However, the water was freezing, and the masked armed guards watched while I bathed. I was told to cut my own hair, and then I didn't immediately comply. They warned me someone else would do it. I started cutting off pieces of my hair with the rusty scissors. I didn't know how much time I had to get the job done. I knew it looked terrible, and I mentally tried to block it out. I was finally able to dress, and barefoot I was sent into the dorms. There were rows and rows of bunks. Some of the women looked up at me, and others were too busy keeping to themselves to react. I wandered around, unsure what to do, and overwhelmed by what was happening around me. An older woman took me under her wing, and told me this facility is where they tend to keep people alive. Did you see people go on the second truck? There was no way they would survive. The labor we did was pointless and infuriating. How did us pulling apart old pieces of rope help rebuild society in any way? Or us breaking old pieces of bone? Some looked more human than animal. The work was tedious and only ended late at night. We would wait for our meal, listening to propaganda about how the NAG were going to save America, that we should be grateful they are here for us, and we have a chance to prove ourselves to them. The loudspeakers kept repeating, and we had to place our hands over our hearts and recite. We give our lives to serve the new American government. We live and die by the mercy of the new American government. We owe everything to the new American government. The new American government will be the only ones who will save us. I live to serve the new American government. The bowls of gruel and bread were brought out. We devoured the food, occasionally biting our fingers. We were so hungry. We weren't permitted to speak, but that didn't stop people from trying. People were talking about how the rebels had been taken out. On the walls, there were posters of propaganda for the NAG. I had more food security in this facility than I did at home. There had been no word about what happened to my family, and nothing about any of the other cities. Every day was the same. The monotonous lifestyle, coupled with the difficult work, caused many people to try to bond with the soldiers, or swear allegiance to the NAG. Some would even turn on their fellow prisoners, even if it wasn't true, and they received better quality food, or were moved to the best bunks in the facility. My thoughts were of escape. Legally, I doubted my parents could do anything about it, and I couldn't escape to go home, because if I did, I couldn't imagine the penalty for harboring a fugitive. The soldiers' helmets meant we never saw their eyes, nor their facial expressions. One of them stopped, and lingered near me a little too long. The soldiers were representatives of the NAG, and therefore were protected by the government, even if they overstepped. He greeted me with my ID number, not my name. That was never used anymore, and told me to follow him. I didn't have a choice, and went along with him into the storeroom. I faced the wall so I wouldn't have to look at him. The soldiers hated being looked at for some reason. The door closed. I heard him press some buttons, and there was a whoosh sound as the soldier took their helmet off. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar face, and saw it was my younger brother, now older. He was a man and looked to be quite healthy. I stared up at his bearded face. He put a finger to his lips to encourage me to be quiet. We hugged and it was so nice to see a friendly face. I couldn't help but hiss at him at why he joined them. He told me a lot had happened. It had indeed been years that had passed. Our parents were both dead. The other dad, the husband of the one who had been captured, had been an agent and reported my parents for some made-up crime. They didn't know what happened to me and believed I'd either been taken by the gangs or killed for meat. Our parents, along with others from our building, were taken and killed by firing squad. The children who remained were taken to camps, brainwashed into becoming the next generation of soldiers. There had been uprisings, and the NAG was getting worried. He told me he was getting me out of here. He wasn't sure how just yet. I nodded, and he told me to act like we had been intimate previously, the reason why I would be allocated extra food. I did so. When the other prisoners asked where I was, I told them, and no one batted an eyelid. One even suggested I do this regularly, in hopes of getting better food all the time. Maybe it had been a dream. I didn't see nor hear from him, for what I'm guessing were months, when I woke up to sirens. A loud booming voice told us we were to meet in the assembly hall, with a long line of other prisoners. I made my way there, only to be grabbed from behind with a gloved hand over my mouth. The grip was released, and I was struck by the butt of the rifle and fell to the ground. I woke up later in the backseat of a jeep. I was groggy, and looked to see who I was guessing was my brother. He sat with an unknown man. We were driving, and I took a peek out the window. We were in the desert, a sharp change in weather from the freezing temperature where we had been. It was empty, and I couldn't see people. I listened to the chatter between the two men. They talked about a place called the Refuge, and how things would change once we were there. I closed my eyes and was skeptical. I had heard the promise of change before, and received nothing. I woke up when we had arrived. They too had armed guards, but certainly lacked the cohesive uniforms the NAG soldiers had. They had old-world military uniforms, with random pieces of NAG technology, probably looted from killed soldiers. There were non-combatants around, farmers and other workers, and I recognized the suspicious look in their eyes at us. My brother got out, shook hands with someone I'm guessing had power within the settlement, and the stranger and I looked at each other awkwardly. He apologized for knocking me out, and asked if my head was alright. I told him it was, even though it still throbbed. It took me a long time to relax and come out of my shell. It had been years since I was imprisoned, and my mind still suffered. For a time, I was happy. The air out here was nice. The food was fresh, and my health greatly improved, and the socialization was pleasant. My brother and I would speak of times before things changed, the fond memories of our parents, the lives we would have lived otherwise. I began my self-defense training and learning a trade. Everyone worked in the settlement regardless of age. We were constantly on the lookout for spies or signs of NAG soldiers. Over time, we saw them less often. The word was they were too busy dealing with infighting within their organization to come after any rebels. Any of the information we received came from roaming traders who could not be relied on for truth or to protect us. We gave the impression that the Refuge was a smaller settlement than it was. We told them we were just a few families trying to make it. So far, they believed us. As expected, the peace we had here did not last long. I'm not sure how things were resolved within the NAG, but their forces became united again. We met with a group of escaped citizens who told us they wanted refuge, and naturally one was a spy. It is interesting how one person can bring down something beautiful. The soldiers raided during the night, and my brother's friend, I can't remember his name, was killed. I had to pull my brother away to stop him running over to try to save the already dead man. And we left the refuge's survivors to their fate. I'm not proud of myself, yet I had to choose survival. Surviving in the desert was difficult. My brother was particularly upset about the loss of his friend, and I hated how I couldn't help him. We wandered for a while before some caravanners took us in. They asked us prying questions about who we were where we were from, and we tried to give them enough information to trust us, but not open us up for any revenge. For a time, we were safe, until we were picked up during the night by slavers, and taken into one of the main cities. I can't remember what it was called during the old world. The new name was Fort Dahl, and it was under the control of the NAG's favored citizens. The air was clear here. There was grass, flowers, and trees. It was beautiful. Homes were maintained and actually looked like homes rather than military camps. The people looked clean. Their clothing bright, maintained, and looked new. The women had their hair styled, and their children looked so healthy. I was brewing with envy. Everyone else struggled with the bare necessities. We were taken underground into a chamber. It was torture being out of the sunlight and being placed in a dark, dreary cell. We were left there for the night without food or water. The next morning the guards came down, stripped us, and we were checked for any injuries or parasites. My brother's tattoo on his upper forearm, the two C's with a single arrow pointed upwards. The symbol of the NAG was noticed. He was taken away to be interrogated, and I hoped he wouldn't be tried as a deserter. A thick, cold metal collar was placed around my neck. I was given coarse clothing and thick wooden clogs that made loud sounds whenever I walked. There was no sneaking when I wore these. I was told to mop the floors in the communal bathrooms. Despite the painful collar and the awkward clogs, this was far better than the camp I was in years ago. I didn't think. I just did my job and mentally blocked it out. I was left alone to work. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I had to be my late 20s now. Maybe even my early 30s. The last time I looked at my face, I was a teenager, and I realized I lost years of my life. I reached out and touched my face. The reflection matched my actions, and eventually, I turned away to get back to my work. I didn't see my brother. I didn't feel safe asking, instead silently listened. If I blended in, no one would notice me. Over time, I was told that if I behaved, I would be treated better. And eventually, I could be freed and allowed to live a normal life here. Our cells were all underground, mainly so the residents weren't forced to look at us and break the fantasy of their magical world where everything and everyone was happy. Months passed, the clogs on my feet were removed, and a smaller collar was worn instead. My food quality increased. During the night when the population were out for whatever social event occurred, the other enslaved people would go in, clean their homes, and disappear again. I wondered if any of them knew about us. Still, no word about my brother. I spoke to the man who I guess was in charge of those who were enslaved. He was kind to me, and would give me tips on how to improve. He did not have a name, but went by the title, First Man. I asked if he saw him. He took me aside and told me he was a deserter, and would be taken away. I told him he was my brother and the last family I had left. First Man told me he couldn't save him. He was to be executed because he had not responded to training, and therefore death was the only option. I asked if I could see him one last time, and he agreed, but just for 5 minutes. I was taken through the dark tunnels underground. I could hear muffled sound all around me, and the coughs of sickly men. I saw him. His bones poked through his skin. The muscle had completely deteriorated. His face was drawn in. He had scarring on his body that healed and then had been damaged again. Clearly his bones had been broken and reset at strange angles. We hugged, cried, and I can barely remember the conversation we had near his end. I'm just happy I was there for him. Those to be executed were taken far from the settlement, and I didn't know it had been done. I found out through gossip of the enslaved people that I had no family left. He was dead. I don't know how much time passed. In time, I was given the smallest of collars and given the most freedom. The magistrate's wife took a liking to me, and so I spent a majority of my time with her. The improved conditions and protection was a relief. Later, I was freed and worked for the wife instead. My work was reasonable, and I had considerable free time. These were the families of those who had caused my life to fall apart. I wasn't me anymore. I don't remember the name I used, and nor do I remember the name my parents called me. There were small incidents, missing items, gates that had been left open, and other smaller safety concerns. The magistrate and his wife were both becoming increasingly irritated. While there were no social movements that I knew of at the time, I knew they could also exist, and did my best to avoid anything that could jeopardize my position. I was comfortable, and as happy as I could be. Hate or judge me all you want, but those things were a rarity. The incidents gradually became worse, and I discovered the source of the issues. I found some newer people were determined to cause damage. I don't know what order or group they were, or if they simply wanted to create chaos. They reported me to First Man, and so I was taken back underground, where I was being held when I first came here. I shivered, and all the painful memories returned to me. I was taken into a room with no light. I don't know how long I was in there. No food, no water. All my memories blurred into one, and I saw my family speaking to me. I longed to join them. They reached out to me with their hands, their faces twisted, and my head swam. I was asked again to tell them what I knew. I don't know them. And the thick iron door closed again. It remained shut until the magistrate came in with soldiers. Their helmets hid their humanity, and he warned me that his wife's favor would not protect me if I didn't tell them what I knew. I told him that I didn't know anything. My brother's past dealings came back to haunt me. He plied one fingernail off at a time, the reason why they don't grow properly. I remember screaming, and now his bloodlust was up. It was difficult to hold him back. I don't know what he used. Something was shoved into my eye. The pain was incomparable, and soon I saw nothing out of it. I couldn't stop screaming as he yelled at me, demanding to know what I knew, and how dare I betray them after they had given me freedom. I swore repeatedly that I didn't know again and again. His voice changed, and the realization I wasn't lying must have set in. He didn't apologize. With nothing to say, he left me bleeding and alone in a cell. I was numb. I didn't speak when a nurse came and tended to my wounds. No matter what happened, I would always be an outsider here, and I'd have to make my own way. I'd never be one of them. No one apologized. I was taken back up and put on bed rest. My eye was gone, and the magistrate's wife gave me a beautiful leather eye patch that would have cost a good amount of credits. It covered the wound her husband devastated my face. I kept doing my duty, smiled, and was ever obedient and grateful. My opportunity to escape came when the guilty ones struck at the leadership when I was there. They came in with guns drawn, ready. They planned this incredibly well, during the changeover of the soldiers, and when the magistrate couple would both be alone. I got into an argument with them. They asked if I wanted to protect the people who killed my brother, who destroyed America, who ruined my eye and stole my life from me. They told me of a future where there would be no NAG, and there would be peace. There was no choice now. I accepted the offered knife. I felt a pang of guilt in my heart when I took the magistrate's wife by her clean, well-groomed hair and tilted her head back to expose her soft throat. She had been kind to me, rescued me even. It wasn't enough. I couldn't make out what she was murmuring, pleading, and I just couldn't listen to it any longer. I slit her throat while her husband screamed at me. He called me every vile name in the book. He spat that he saved me, and this was how I repaid him. I didn't want to see what my new comrades thought. I took the knife and drove it into his chest. I looked him in the eye as I did so. He whispered something I couldn't make out, and I stabbed him repeatedly, my face and body coated in his blood. I was quickly pulled from him, and while they were angry at me for breaking whatever plan they had, I showed I was now dedicated to their cause, and there was no going back for me now. Joining another group was not something I hoped for. We rounded the rest of the settlement up and drove them into the center square. They didn't endure the same way other people had, and they threatened us, telling us the rest of the army would be here soon, that we'd all be killed. It was an idle threat, and we all knew it. They were killed. Men, women, children. Decades worth of bottled up aggression was taken out on them. It wasn't an execution. It was butchery. Threats and slurs were written in their blood on the walls. The place was looted of weapons and valuable items before fires were set everywhere. If they couldn't keep or hold it, they would destroy it, so the NAG could not take it back. The rebel group, one of several smaller groups that would occasionally work with others. Their names have blurred. There are too many created and then disbanded. I met someone among them. He served as an engineer, and we got married. Not legally, although the law was a difficult thing to determine, since it depended on which group had dominance over an area at any time. The doctor told me I was unlikely to have children due to my age and injury. I focused on the health of the community I was in. We traveled between two different communities, and along the road, I found a small boy amongst the burnt remains of his family. He was mute, unable to tell me his name or where he was from originally. I took him in and raised him as my own. The established leadership were either getting older or had been killed in the various battles and skirmishes. I found myself gaining increased respect and responsibilities within the community. There were 5 rebel factions that were brought together under a single banner. Our resources now shared, and our territory had grown considerably. The tide was turning. The NAG had taken too much, being too power-hungry, and lost the respect of normal people. More of them started to join us with the promise of liberty and freedom that had long been denied to them. We did oppose the brutality of the NAG. We would forgive rather than brutalize our enemies. Many of the former NAG soldiers came to our side, only having joined due to pressure, being stolen as a child, or through the force of conscription. They were losing, and they knew it. There were some of them that were die-hard loyalists to the order, fanatical. They would tell us we didn't know what we were doing. I became the unofficial leader. In the rare moments I wasn't working, I would dream of a renewed country and world. It didn't take long before all the NAG settlements came under our banner. Sure, we had to use brute force where we can, and show them that we would punish those who rose against us. Loyalty was survival, and survival came at all costs. The final battle occurs in 48 hours, and will decide the future of our world. I hope you got everything you need. That is my life, and the course of it. I hope you got everything you need and my tale inspires you to act. Or this could be your descendants' lives. Take the last fort. Defeat the NAG. It was strange sending people to their deaths with the hope of what would come. I listened while the radio sent back reports of the movements of the troops. Our valiant soldiers were fighting for our future. The radio boomed with cries of victory. I stood with a tear of happiness in my solitary eye. All the pain, all the bloodshed, and we were finally free. I was transported by helicopter to the site. There are still dead bodies and the smell of gunfire in the air. I placed my hands on one comrade's hands or another. Some prisoners were rounded up, and they will be offered one chance of mercy. I approached the podium where I would give the final speech. We have brought liberty back to our homeland. Our lives will be one of prosperity and rebuilding. We still need your help to achieve this. I have never been one for long speeches. All hail the New World Order. I hope you enjoy this story. What did you think of it? Let me know what you thought in the comments section down below. Don't forget to stab the like button, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. This video is made with the support of my incredible channel members, Patreon subscribers and all my viewers. Thank you so much for supporting me. Don't forget to check out my social media accounts below, including my merch. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.